Call the meeting to order, and please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Want to take roll call, please?
Yes, Director Davidson,
Here.
Director Stump,
Present.
and President Bradley.
Here.
Absent are Director Dean and Director Gray.
Noted. Item 2, public comment. At this time, members of the public may address the board on any non-agendized item. The public is encouraged to work through staff to place items on the agenda for board consideration. No action can be taken on matters not listed on the agenda. Comments are limited to 5 minutes per person. Do we have any public comment this morning? Ken?
Ask and you shall receive.
There you go.
I've been attending these board meetings now for a year. The goal is to try to understand just how this agency could have become such a burden on ratepayers, causing pain and suffering to a level that this board simply does not understand, and worse, from your actions and reactions, I don't really think you care. The reason for this dysfunction is simple, and it falls directly on the CCWD board actions. GM Mitch Dion was your poster child, as long as he was the spearhead getting this board's rate increase approved last year. He then did two things that obviously did not sit well with this board. The first was to actually create a reserve account to take the new funds and start the infrastructure upgrades that this board has delayed for decades. The delays have ended up impacting ratepayers because the board previously always found ways to get these funds into the general fund, whereby poof, the money was gone, spent on anything and everything deemed necessary, but some of the most important projects work. Building the CCWD culture appears to have always been at the top of the list. The cost of these upgrades will now be far more than if the mismanagement and incompetence of this board was not so long-standing. The second thing that GM Dion did was to have the audacity to actually propose an austerity program. Heaven forbid that this board would actually, over time, provide relief to ratepayers. Your decision to then take the action of firing GM Dion for such actions will go down in history to prove that this board is equally as bad, if not worse, than previous boards, and ratepayers continue to have to pay through the nose for your horrible decisions. In my opinion, you are a disgrace of a board. It is not the general manager who should have been fired, but the CCWD board that needs to be fired, and hopefully in November that is actually what will occur.
Any further public comment? Okay, item 3, consent agenda. The following items are expected to be routine, non-controversial. Items will be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member may request that any item be removed for later discussion. 3A, approval of minutes for the board meetings of April 23rd and May 14th, 2014. 3B, ratified claim summary number 507, Secretarial Fund, in the amount of $1,590,300.22 for May 2014. Patricia Christensen, Auditor Controller. And 3C, authorization to write off uncollectible accounts receivable. Again, Patricia Christensen, Auditor Controller. And 3D, approving authorized signers on the following banking and investment accounts. Again, Patricia Christensen, Auditor Controller. The 3 accounts are Umpqua Bank Account, Wells Fargo Custodial Account, and Local Agency Investment Fund.
Move for acceptance.
Second.
We have a motion and a second.
Public can pull, madam.
On one of those items. The one related to the $1,000,005, there are 2 pay periods.
Hold on, this is not how it goes. You can pull an item,
This is the consented agenda.
You're welcome to pull the item, and then we'll discuss it.
Okay,
Just say which item you want pulled. We'll,
okay,
If
because I
it-
have a question in regards to the
okay.
$1 million.
3B. Okay, we're going to pull item 3B for discussion. 3B is no longer in a consent agenda. Any,
so you have your motions for 3A, C, and D?
Correct.
I'll second that.
okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? 0. It's 302, Mona. Okay, now we've pulled item 3B, ratify claim summary number 507, secretarial fund in the amount of $1,590. Ken, do you have a public comment?
Question. The $1.5 million includes 2 payroll periods, director expenses, and vendors. But there's another item on there that says other payroll-related costs, and it's $240,000. I'd like to know what that represents.
Patty?
I mean, can't you answer the question? You're a member of the board and approving this thing?
Hey, Ken?
Ken, can you please sit down and allow Patty to come to the microphone to answer your question? Thank you.
That would be the payroll taxes, the flex online spending, and other miscellaneous bank fees.
Thank you.
Does that adequately answer your question?
I hope so, thank you.
I hope so, too.
Okay, move on.
Move for acceptance of item 3B.
Second.
Can we get a motion and a second on item 3B in the consent agenda? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 302. Okay, on to item 4, old business. Discussion action regarding approval of employment contract with interim general manager Larry Diamond, our interim general manager.
Well, council has worked on a contract for my employment as interim general manager, taking direction from the board. This is fairly similar to a prior agreement I had, I think, last time in '09, with some modifications that were discussed with the board. So it's there for your consideration.
Well, I'll move for acceptance.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second on item 4. Any public comment on this item?
Excuse me, I'd like to know, how many times have you been promoted to interim general manager, Larry?
This would be the 5th.
This will be the 5th. Great service, Larry.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? 0. Again, 302. Okay, moving on to item 5, new business. 5A, discussion action regarding notice of curtailment from State Water Resources Control Board, adoption of conservation measures. Again, Larry Diamond.
Yeah, if you'll excuse me, I want to be a bit methodical in going through this. But first, if I've been remiss, I'd like to introduce our special counsel, Andrew Derringer, who's sitting in for Matt today. I'm not sure everybody on the board has met him. I've been working on him with some water right issues and other issues of a similar nature.
Welcome, Andrew.
We received a notice of unavailability of water and immediate curtailment from the State Water Resources Control Board. And this notice was received on June 2nd. The notice essentially restricts diversion under the district's post-1914 appropriative rights, such as those we hold on the Stanislaus River. And there's an exception under the curtailment notice that permits continued use of that water when that water is the sole source for human health and safety purposes. The impact to the individual service area varies because the terms and conditions of the many permits also varies, and I'd like to step through that. But it's our general understanding that CCWD will continue to be able to make diversions of carryover storage, water that was stored last year, as well as diversions to storage that occurred prior to this notice of curtailment being enacted. And that will form, in large part, the water we're going to be using in the coming year. In February, we went over a memo with the board about the status of water supply and the concurrent demands in the various service areas, and I'd like to run through those again just to give everybody a feel as to where we are now. Ebbets Pass, Copper Cove are primarily served from Stanislaus River water sources. Spicer Reservoir is the storage reservoir for both of those service areas when there is insufficient natural flow to make direct diversions from the river, such as this year and such as under the curtailment notice. When I wrote this memo, there was 105,000 acre-feet in storage. Ebbets Pass uses roughly 1,900 acre-feet in a normal year. Copper Cove, roughly 1,300 acre-feet, again in a normal year. As the board knows, NCPA is the primary user of Spicer water, and that's for generation purposes. I noted that NCPA typically has not drawn the reservoir down below 60,000 acre-feet, but I need to get a more accurate forecast of their expected reservoir level for the fall period to see where we're going to be. Of course, a lot of our concerns here may not be so much in getting through this season as what does the following season bring us? What's the following winter going to bring as far as rain and snow? For the Genuine, La Catena, Rancho service areas, they're all dependent upon New Hogan and the Calaveras. Of course, Calaveras natural flows dry up real early in the season, so we're all dependent on those flows that were diverted to storage last year, and again, pretty modest amount of additional water that came into the reservoir this year prior to curtailment. When I wrote the memo, the storage level was at 86,000 acre-feet, and our total annual use, including crop irrigation, roughly 3,500, maybe up to 4,000 in a normal year. So we're going into the season looking pretty healthy so far. However, as in the case of Spicer, there's another large user of that storage volume. That's Stockton East Water District. They are the water master for the conservation storage volume that we have there in New Hogan Reservoir. And I'll need a more accurate, detailed end-of-season projection from Stockton East to give you a better idea of how we're going to be going into what we hope is a wet winter. Bureau of Rec is the water right holder, needs to file a certification of curtailment, just as we were obliged to file on our water rights. And I'm waiting for either Bureau or Stockton East to give us any word on any restrictions they may impose for use of their water. Again, we are a federal water contractor. We have water under contract with the Bureau of Reclamation, and they may impose certain constraints that we'll be obliged to impose on our service areas. But I'll let you know when that happens, as soon as I know. As far as West Point and Wilseyville, we're still using the primary diversion. That's at Bear Creek. That's the primary source of raw water for the West Point, Wilseyville, Balmerville communities. Our guess is that it'll last another 2-3 weeks before there's so little water left in the creek that we have to let it go by. And as is typically the case, I mean, often the case, even in a normal year, we switch over to the Middle Fork Pump Station and purchase supplementary water from Calaveras Public Utility District. And so that, again, is the plan here in this coming year. I put in my memo that regulating reservoir is full. It's 50 acre-feet, which is a fair amount of volume for the small usage in the community. I put the usage is typically under 400 acre-feet. Well, it's gone down even further than that. I know Bill had mentioned a number of times the pipeline replacement project that had been completed with grant funding up there, as well as the Balmerville Redwood tank replacement project. And those seem to have resulted in some significant reductions in raw water demand up there. We may actually cut this usage in half, both through conservation, the conservation by the individual customers, as well as the water saved through the new projects being put into place. So that's really good news for us. Sheep Ranch is dependent upon the San Antonio Creek and Big Trees Creek tributaries. And water stored up there in the Mill Pond and White Pines Lake have 25 acre feet roughly, maybe a little less in the Mill Pond, and when White Pines is full, about 262 acre feet. Use in Sheep Ranch, as most of you know, is a pretty small amount. I put under 20 acre feet, and most of that water, I think, goes to either evaporation, seepage losses in the reservoir, or water losses transporting it down the creek and into the flume and pipe system. That's our delivery, our very aged delivery mechanism for the community down there. Wallace Wells, no problems to report yet at this point. They're hanging in there. That's good. We had 7 days to submit our certification forms under the curtailment notice, and that's been done. Papers in at the state. The state did ask where we were going to continue using water, what measures are being taken to reduce water use. And as the board's aware, we have an adopted urban water management program. The last urban water plan was, well, it's dated 2010, adopted in 2011, and it has a 5-year cycle, and we're just about there where we need to update that plan again. Subsection of that plan is a water shortage contingency plan, and a subsection of that one is emergency demand reduction program, which outlines measures to be taken in the event of a water shortage, such as the one we're currently experiencing. And if there's long-term shortage, the board is to consider making a declaration regarding the appropriate stage of conservation measures to be implemented, as well as enforcement measures that go along with them. Up till now, we've advocated voluntary conservation for some months to comply with the governor's declaration of drought emergency. The staff is now recommending board adoption of mandatory Stage 3 water conservation and enforcement measures. And I've attached an excerpt from the plan itself attached to the recommended ordinance. We've boiled that down into what we think are the necessary measures to be implemented. I want to note again, I guess I can't emphasize this enough, that we may get responses to our curtailment filings, or the state could change the rules of the game and impose additional constraints, much more severe restrictions on utilizing current resources. The result could be we come back to the board and adopt even more stringent measures. But let me step through what we're recommending to the board under the proposed ordinance. There's an attachment to the ordinance cover sheet entitled Stage 3 Water Conservation Mandatory Measures. Starts out with continued public outreach to convey water shortage information and measures to the public to reduce indoor water use. Prohibits use of water for cleaning outdoor hardscape. Irrigation prohibited between the hours of 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Certainly it's much more efficient to use your water not in the heat of the day. Line flushing has been discontinued by our crews. Use of water in decorative fountains and recreational ponds is noted as to the minimum to preserve aquatic life if present. Filling of new or existing pools is prohibited. As far as residential landscape irrigation, it goes to an odd-even watering regimen. We've been there many times. I think the board's pretty familiar with this. And it's explicitly showing Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday for the odd numbers, Monday, Wednesday, Friday for even numbers, Sunday, no watering. Water for irrigation of commercial landscape, schools, and parks. We're looking at 35% reduction. This may be able to be achieved through a 3-day-a-week watering schedule, but we'll have to keep some tabs on our larger water users through looking at the meters and see how they're doing. Dust control, we can use treated effluent for dust control. I know Bill's trying to get that set up for us with a state permit. And as far as the golf courses, the 3 golf courses we work with take treated effluent, make use of all of our treated effluent up at Forest Meadows, Lock Antenna, and for the Copper Cove Lake Tulloch community, all that effluent's utilized by the Saddle Creek Golf Course. So as stated under measure number 9, golf course irrigation would be restricted to greens and tees if raw water were the sole source for irrigation, which it is not for those courses I mentioned. So we're looking for raw water delivery to be reduced by 35% because treated effluent is in use.
What happens after if the ponds are emptied? Or is there always going to be a mix?
Typically, they'll empty the ponds prior to needing supplemental water.
No, that's my point. After that occurs,
Yeah.
then they're under a restriction?
For a 35% reduction of the raw
Yes.
water, yes,
But not until that occurs.
until that occurs. Right, otherwise, they are free to use what limited resource we have. The effluent is not sufficient to meet the full summer irrigation needs typically of any of these golf courses. And so we're hoping they will make the most judicious use of the effluent that is available to them prior to needing to turn to.
And just to
any raw water.
understand, I'm sorry, Larry,
Yeah,
just
please.
to understand 9 again, once
Yeah.
that effluent, once the treated water is gone, then the golf course is irrigating with raw water, and they would only be able to water the greens and tees?
It was no more explicit than that. We're hoping that their overall water reduction, where effluent has been used, will be reduced by 35%.
But it's not the intent, even though it looks like that's what it says.
I know. If that's all they can water with a reduced volume, then that's all they can water.
Okay.
But there are some courses that may not have access to, in fact, there were some courses. I guess Sequoia Woods, Meadowmont, those are examples of courses that didn't have access to treated effluent. And so they would be, or they would have been restricted to tees and greens. But in the case of those that use effluent to supplement their irrigation demands, we were only looking for a 35% reduction in their raw water use.
Okay.
So it sounds like there's 2 different standards.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
maybe we need some clarification, because it doesn't sound to me, if the standard is if they're using recycled water, then that's it. If you're using a mixture, then all you have to do is reduce your raw water usage by 35%.
That's what we wrote into the plan. Yeah.
Okay, but if you're not using recycled water, then all you can water is tees and greens.
Yes, unless, let me give an example. I think Sequoia Woods has a well source, if I'm not mistaken, Don.
Yeah.
Forest Meadows has also a well source, although they're using effluent. If they didn't.
Forest
know,
Meadows is.
Forest Meadows had some wells, and if I knew they were still functional.
It isn't. It wasn't.
No longer?
No longer.
Okay.
The well has been down for a while. Actually, they were looking at buying water from us last year.
Okay.
Bummer.
Along with the mandatory conservation measures, we have some enforcement measures. Again, this is just transposed from the plan. For violation of the state's irrigation and outdoor water use restrictions, we start off with a written warning from the district that further violation will result in possible restriction of water service. Stage 2, we jump in and put a flow restricting device for 30 days. There's a $25 administrative fee to restore the service back to what it was. Item number 3 carries it a little bit further, that a flow restricting device will be installed by the district and remain in place until the Board of Directors repeals the state of emergency or threat of emergency or shortage, and upon payment again of the $25 administrative and device installation and removal cost. 4 is we can actually pursue violations in a legal venue as permitted by water code. So that's the long and short of what we're proposing.
The State Water Resource Control Board, this was a junior rights curtailment.
Yes.
Last week I had a conversation with Felicia Marcus, the chair of the State Water Resource Control Board, and she kind of indicated that as the summer progresses, it may go into the pre-14s. Will that have an effect on us going into the summer?
Potentially, because when we switch from Bear Creek to CPUD's water on the Middle Fork, that's pre-14 water. If it's subject to curtailment and CPUD has to adopt more stringent usage standards because of that, we'll come back to the board and let you know that our service area there has to be subject to the same standards. Yes, so there's...
You might want to prepare for that eventuality. I don't anticipate things changing too dramatically.
I hope that's the case. I put a little excerpt into the agenda package that shows you what stage 4 looks like. Essentially, it's a prohibition on outdoor irrigation. It starts there. That's the most dramatic difference. There's other differences as well, but that's kind of the big difference between 3 and 4 in our plan.
I'd like to stay out of 4 if we can possibly stay out of 4.
It may or may not be possible.
Okay.
We'll see as the summer progresses and as the state board continues handing down these kinds of rulings. They may even get into a discussion of riparian users.
Yeah. Felicia indicated that she did not want to touch riparians unless absolutely necessary.
We'll see how that works.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Any further discussion on this item? Any public comment on this item? Bertha.
Bertha Underhill, ratepayer out of Camp Connell. And first of all, I'd like to ask Larry about the original document you gave to the, or memo that you gave to the board. That's online. We can get a copy of that.
Are you referring to the notice of curtailment?
No, the one before that. You had talked about issuing documentation to the board about how we were going to treat water.
Was this the excerpt from our urban water management plan?
Well, if that was, you were discussing, you were referencing it, and I would like to get a copy of that if possible.
Okay.
And I think that I know that my biggest concern is the fact that we're coming into stage 3, and we in Calaveras County, the ratepayers, have been doing water conservation on a voluntary basis, and there have been some reduction, but now that we're going into stage 3, what plans do you have to educate your ratepayers about exactly what that means? Because you made reference to the fact that no filling of water pools, and there are a few pools around. Fortunately, Angels Camp, brand new one, is not affected by us because they don't get water from CCWD, but there are pools, Blue Lake Springs, Forest Meadows, and so I would certainly want to know how you're going to be handling that. And again, public education, I think, is the biggest concern I have.
What are your suggestions?
Well, you have hired a public relations person,
Customer service, you mean?
customer service, and in public relations and to come around, because up in Ebbets Pass, for example, we have 14 homeowners or homeowner organizations. We have, Copperopolis, we have Wallace and Burson, everybody. It doesn't make any difference. But education specifically coming out and rolling out stage 3 guidelines. And I don't mean, just putting it in the enterprise, because not everybody reads the enterprise. Maybe you could do something, adding a sheet to the next bill, or using your bill, and we had talked about that, or that had come up several years ago about printing something on there, again, for your ratepayer.
Well, some very good suggestions, Bertha. I think if we do adopt these control measures, I think it is very important that we get the word out to our ratepayers as to what these measures will be. And it's good advice, and I think it will be forthcoming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We don't really have a choice, do we?
I don't believe so. I think the state can come back with a much heavier hand than proposing.
Are our measures, would you say that they're the strictest, or?
No.
So they're.
No, definitely not. There are other communities that are under far more severe restraints than what we're seeing here. And you have a stage 4, which allows you to ramp it up if that becomes necessary. I think we're in a rather fortunate position at the moment to have so much carryover storage for all these communities. Even if Sheep Ranch gets dicey, I mean, we have a contingency for that.
So basically, we're saving water for people downstream.
That's the state's perspective, that the water we save is available for other folks that are suffering more severe restrictions.
Right.
And Larry, is it also possible that our conservation measures and our curtailment fact sheet that we submitted to the state, is it possible that they will come back with this isn't good enough, do more?
There is that possibility. If and when that's going to occur, the state's been inundated with, I can't imagine how many of these forms, one for each water right out there. I'm not sure what kind of time frame that would entail. Andrew, do you have any better feel for a response from the state for our submittals?
I think
Yes.
so. Here, I think it's likely to be an ongoing conversation with the board. I know sometimes it doesn't feel like that when you get a notice in the mail and it says do this, but that's where you can call us, and it turns into, well, what are you already doing? Are there any more low-hanging fruit? And then it becomes more of a back and forth, and we can have an honest conversation with board staff about, well, what can we do and what's really kind of beyond the pale. But at this point, I think the rules are kind of in flux as far as the board's concerned.
Yeah.
I know Tuolumne County is in a real desperate shape. They've got some real tough restrictions over there.
Yeah.
Well, I'll move for acceptance.
I'll second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second on this item. We've had public comment. Any further discussion up here? Seeing none. All those in favor of item 5A signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Sort of. Aye.
Aye. Opposed? 0. 302 again.
Can I ask just one quick question?
Yeah, to the microphone, please, Ken. Thanks.
Larry, do you have any idea of what the percentage savings on water has been with the voluntary program? Is it anywhere near the 35%?
I'd have to ask Bill if he has any feel for that. We've often gotten almost a 25% reduction in past efforts when we've just asked for voluntary.
Typically, when we ask for voluntary, people step up to the plate, so you can probably assume we get at least 20%. I don't know the number.
I'm carrying the bucket out now.
Yeah.
Well, I'm telling you,
Thank
typically
you.
when we ask for the voluntary, we do get it. So but I don't have the number off the top of my head. But like Larry said, the biggest thing we have to look for, West Point, we saved approximately 168 feet of water by replacing all that pipeline, which is a substantial savings. We're talking at least 30%.
So there is something to talk to the state about, but we are still.
Well, I can't believe we put that in our response to the state with the fact that West Point did, in fact, save 168 feet. We also have the voluntary conservation. I mean, typically what we'll do is we'll get signs ready to put out for the body and watering gate and stuff like that. We've had to do some of this stuff before. We've also been in communication with South Creek.
5B.
I mean, we haven't been, you know, we've already been having a
Just made it for the cookies?
about the fact that we.
Just made it for the coffee and cookies.
And Ken, it varies by area, certainly. Up in Ebbets Pass, where there's little outdoor watering, you know, see less of a reduction. It's more dramatic out in, say, Jenny Lind, where you've put the odd even signboards out for years, and it's been pretty helpful down there.
Yeah, we
Much more
definitely
noticeable.
Flushing, things like that. I mean, we've been doing as much as we can.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on, item 5B. Discussion action regarding fiscal year 2014-2015 preliminary budget. Jeffrey Meyer, Director of Administrative Services, welcome.
Would anybody like to grab some coffee before I start? Let me go ahead and fire this up.
Yeah, maybe I will.
I know it's your favorite time of year. It's that time of year again. We're looking at our fiscal 2014-2015 budget, both for operating budget and the capital improvement budget, or what we call CIP. There's a couple things to keep in mind as we go through this process, and one of the things that you just talked about, curtailments and the effects it could have on our budget. And there's a number of unknowns. And as I go through this process, I'm going to try to highlight some of the assumptions we've made in preparing this budget, and also some of the challenges we face, and in particular, the unknowns we face. At this point in time, this is our best guess as to where we're going to be for this upcoming year. And it is a conservative approach because we have to be at this particular point in time. I'm going to talk about the budget process a little bit, highlight some of the assumptions both on the revenue side and the expenditure side, look at projected revenues and expenses, and basically pull it all together in a summary of the operating budget, and then we'll also talk about the CIP budget. The budget process is the same as we do every single year. We bring it to the board early in the year to get an idea of what your goals are, what you want to try to accomplish in the upcoming year. Departments submit their budget requests to the admin services, which is myself. I review it. I work with some others. Patty and Stacy have helped me review a number of these documents, as well as salary and benefit projections. We're looking at if there are going to be any new positions or fewer positions, and that's generally run by the general manager for his approval. And then as we come together, after we look at all the budget requests, we look at the salary and benefit projections, I draft a budget. We look at the preliminary and see if it's balanced or not. And as I drafted this budget, it was in draft form, ready to go, and then we got the notice of curtailments, which then again required some revisions because we're looking at a potential reduction in our water consumptive revenues. So those are things that it's kind of been on the fly, and we've made some adjustments over time. We did present this budget to the Finance Committee on the 5th. Directors Ratterman and Stump reviewed it and recommended it to be moved forward. I did make one change at this particular point in time after it was presented to you. I had to add another $10,000 for a lease. Is it a cell tower lease with the Archdiocese?
Yes.
Yes. So we have that coming up, and we just received notification that afternoon of the Finance Committee meeting.
Yeah.
So some budget assumptions on the revenue side. As we're looking at curtailments, I looked at our consumptive revenues on the water side. Obviously, it's not going to affect our base rates, nor is it going to affect the base rate for sewer. I anticipate, I project, and really, it's a lag, that we're going to see a reduction of 25% of our consumptive revenues, which equates to about $360,000. Consumptive revenues make up about 17–18% of our total water revenues. So I'm factoring this in. We're going to have to monitor this closely. So as we go throughout the year, see how it affects us. It's a matter of timing. This curtailment is not going to affect fiscal year 13-14 because we're already in the last month of the billing cycle. And obviously it's not going to take effect now. And the question is, how soon will it take effect over time? How soon will the voluntary efforts for conservation play into the reduction of water use, especially down in the western portion of the county, Copperopolis and Jenny Lind, where they do most of the outdoor watering is done in that location. Property tax, yes, sir.
I just wanted to make an observation that reduction in consumptive revenues represents less than 3% of our total operating revenues.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
But that 360,000 offset means I've got to cut back elsewhere.
Oh, I absolutely agree, but I'm just saying that it's not as disastrous as it might sound if you look at the isolated figure.
Yes, if it stays at 25%.
It depends if you're part of the 3% that's cut,
Yeah.
how disastrous it is.
Property tax revenues. I don't anticipate a significant increase. I rounded up to 1%, but that's about where we stand. There's not going to be significant appreciation in the assessed values of the tax rolls. So we're not going to see we're not going to get back to our higher levels that we once experienced, getting $3.1, $3.2 million a year. We're still going to stay with the 85-15 split between operations special projects fund. I did add $75,000 of one-time revenues coming in from the creation of the Fly and Acres Assessment District. This is for costs associated with account establishment fees, water meter installs, and inspections. Most of those will occur after July 1, so we anticipate that. But again, that's a one-time offset. And as far as power generation revenues, I reduced New Hogan by about $75,000 from prior year. We're showing less revenues. The new Spicer NCPAs will not be affected because they base their reimbursements to us on the engineering construction index. And that's done by the feds, and they look at that and it's adjusted quarterly. So we're actually going to see a bit of a jump, but not significant. Transfers in. We use transfers in to move money from one fund basically into the operating fund. All our debt service is paid out of the operating fund, but the source of that debt doesn't necessarily reside in the operating fund. Our BBVA loan that we took out in 2013, which was a refinancing of the 2004 revenue bond. A significant portion of that debt is associated with 4 expansion funds: Jenny Lind Water, Copper Cove Water, Evans Pass Water, and Copper Cove Sewer. So they have a portion of the debt which actually adds up to about $1.2 million of the total $1.8 million. So we actually move that money out of those expansion funds into the operating fund to pay for that portion of debt. That's why you see transfers in. It's not necessarily a revenue, but it's a shifting of funds. We also move funds from our interest reserve fund, the 108 fund, to fund special projects, or in this case, we've got some more water coming in for water rates expenses. Last meeting, you approved a contract with Ecor for some work on the North Fork of the Stanislaus. So that's how we're transitioning and backfilling some of our costs in the areas of water rights and studies. Some of those for legal, some of those for professional. I mentioned debt service. About $840,000 is coming from the expansion funds. $380,000 is coming from the special project fund. That's Fund 108 to backfill what Jenny Lind cannot pay. There's not enough funds in the Jenny Lind expansion fund because we're just not getting enough connections at this point. So carrying on what we've done for the last several years, we're backfilling that fund by a loan, so to speak, from the special projects fund. And in time, it will be paid off. This is a maximum amount. If we do get connections down there, this amount will be reduced by the number of connections and the dollars collected, but I have to look at the worst case scenario. Yes, Mr. Son.
Could we get an updated sheet of the status of our expansion funds?
Yes, I can supply that for the next meeting.
I'm not worried about this year, but I'm looking out a little bit farther.
Yes.
How many connections are we projecting? Are we still projecting 0?
No, we're projecting about 20. And that's conservative because we have been getting some across the counters, but we're not at 0, we're at 20, but it still has a minimum effect on our rate revenues. It just helps backfill the expansion funds.
But is that system-wide or just for Jenny Lind?
Pardon me?
Is that system-wide or is that just for Jenny Lind?
That's system-wide.
The 20 connections you're talking about, okay.
Yes.
And are those 20 connections included in your number there, or is this assuming 0?
This assumes 0.
Okay.
And again, at the end of the year, we'll balance things out, and we'll know how much money was actually carried in. If we get 2 connections, that's $20,000. So that will reduce that amount by a similar amount.
Okay.
But we won't know until we close out the fiscal year.
Okay, we do have a question.
Yes. You borrowed $3 million from internally, and I want to know if it came from the expansion or the reserve, to build this building.
It came from selected expansion funds.
It came from expansion funds. And so how does that affect our debt service?
It doesn't affect the debt service. Before we looked at where we were going to pull those funds from, we looked at the debt service obligations for the 4 expansion funds that had the Jenny Lind Water, Copper Cove Water, Evans Pass Water, and Copper Cove Sewer. So they have sufficient funds at this time in those 4, except for Jenny Lind Water, in those expansion funds to pay debt service all the way through 2017-18. So it does not affect their ability to pay their debt service obligation.
Okay, but we borrowed a part of that money out of those funds.
Not Evans Pass Water, I don't have the exact list, but none of it came from Jenny Lind Water. And because there wasn't any, and Evans Pass Water, we were very diligent in that because we know there's just going to be about enough to handle the debt service with a few connections and interest.
If we had gone out and actually borrowed the money from a bank, then it would affect our debt service.
So debt service is not affected.
Not at this point. We are still paying interest only at this particular point in time back to those expansion funds. So we are paying on those loans.
And that revenue to pay that is coming from where?
The interest reserve fund is unallocated interest because that fund generates interest earnings. So we use some of the interest earnings out of that fund to fund the debt service. Any other questions on this slide?
No.
Okay, this is small. However, in your handout, page 2 of your budget handout, I do show all the revenues. But this is just kind of a summary of operating and rate revenues and such. Bottom line is, we're going to be pulling with revenues excluding transfers, because remember, transfers in is not revenues. Our operating revenues are going to increase maybe $32,000 from last year. There's not a whole lot of significant increase.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to go back.
Okay?
We have here, by department on the previous slide. What,
The revenues?
well, no, I'm on the operating budget, or I don't have slides, I guess I got
Okay,
the.
that's, the expenses I'm going to get into.
Okay.
A little bit later. So I want to talk about revenues first. Bottom line is our revenues are still flat, and that's what we talked about over the last number of months, that we're seeing flat revenues, but projection of expenses are going to increase over time.
Jeff?
Yes.
I think it's important that the public recognize that our revenues are flat because all of the rate increase went for R&R. There is no additional revenues from the rate increase.
That is correct.
For operations.
For operations.
For operations, yes.
Okay.
On the expenditure side, the assumptions that we made was that we reduced 2 positions that are associated with retirements in fiscal year 13-14, and they were both in the utilities department. So we had some salary and benefit savings there. However, so those were offset by an increase in our PERS rates, and this is going to be a trend over the next several years. It went up about 1%. This is the employer share of the PERS retirement. And they project it going up at least 1% a year for the next several years because they have changed some of the key factors in their actuarial study, mortality rate, the smoothing effect and such, and how they have their pooled assets. So this year, it's gone up 1%. On the flip side, employees are now paying 100% of the employee share of their PERS retirement. The total employee share for CCWD's employees for the 2.7 and 55 is 8% of the salary. We've graduated it in over 3 years. Now employees are paying that full 8%. So we did have some savings in the neighborhood of $200,000, roughly $200,000 when employees picking that up. So that did assist the district in their operating budget. Medical costs, we're looking at an increase of about 5%. Our medical insurance rates go by calendar year, but we don't have the 2015 numbers, so we kind of have to project what they'll be. At this particular point in time, I'd like to go on to some of the key assumptions on the individual departments and what I factored into the department budgets. One of them is the board of directors. Now, since we have never done this type of election before, where we're part of the general election, and then we also have 4 seats up for re-election, I put in 40,000. It may be less than that, but I had to put something in there as an estimate. I can't find any good estimate at this point other than that.
Just to bring up a point, I was at the East Bay Mud Board yesterday, and the subject come up. For them, it's like $400,000 per seat for their election, their cost. And there was some discussion about if people run unopposed, do you still put them on the ballot? And there was somebody in the public that said that they, from the Sierra Club, that thought that they should at least have the opportunity to have a write-in candidate. And then they brought up the fact, yeah, okay, it's at $400,000 per.
I do have a question on that.
Go ahead.
You said 40 $40,000 for the election cost. On this expenditure summary, the variance is $49,552. What's that additional $9,500? On page number 6.
Oh, that's increased costs associated with medical costs and an increase in per diems.
Per diems?
Yes, it's meaning per diems. Because it goes,
And that cost will go up to what?
It'll go up $5.
it goes up $5 per diem.
So that would be 135, correct?
Yes.
Thank you for the raise, by the way, because I'm pretty sure you voted for that.
Is 40,000 paid to the county for
Yes.
things on the ballot?
Yes. Our district used to used to be a mail-in voting, and a count where the ballots were mailed out, and then you had to submit them by mail and counted. And the county wanted to go away from that, so we're included in the November general election ballot.
It's actually swept back several times. We used to be a part of it. But no, we used to have our own special, all the special districts had their own election. Then the county requested that we go to an all-mail ballot because we could save money. And then they've come back to us and said, we want to have everybody in the same general election. We've kind of always gone with their recommendations, but it just seems like it's a moving target.
There was a big, thing about how we could save money or how CCWD would save money. I'd like to see after this is all over, if that in fact happens.
We'll be looking at that, especially as we project future year election costs. We've made a little bit of a change in names of departments, and I'm going to confuse you a little bit. We've done some shifting around. What we used to call admin services, administrative services, included the general manager, included HR, included IT, included contracts, risk management. But things have changed, duties have shifted over. And as director of administration, I don't have HR and I don't have the general management, but I have there's a number of functions that are pooled together in finance/customer service/administrative services. So now, for lack of a better name, I'm calling the general manager's department, basically general management. And we've shifted some of the costs outside of that are not related to HR and general management. It's a little bit more transparent. Instead of loading up that particular department's budget with costs that they do not actually control, we move them out so you can see the true cost of that particular department. Their budget is going to go up at, again, an estimated $35,000 for the general manager's recruitment process. I know there's looking at doing a combination internal and possibly external, but I had to put some money in there for that process. In utilities budget, we've got several increases. CPPA is going to increase the electrical costs for us. And when we look at that, our budget for electricity is $900,000. So it's a significant cost. And at this particular point in time, they were looking at a 1 cent per kilowatt hour increase. They're going to use some reserves, tentatively use some reserves to drop that down to a half a cent, and it equates to about $60,000 increase. That could change at an upcoming meeting, but at this particular point in time, this is our best information. If it goes up to a full cent, we'd have to absorb another $60,000. Materials and supplies have gone up $40,000 for UV bulb replacements, and we have increase in fed state water and sewer fees by about $50,000. The increases may not be as significant as you see from year to year, from actual to actual for next year, the $50,000, but we under budgeted in 13-14 for this category. That's why you see such a big jump. Water resources, this is where we have some significant increases, but it also has to do with our water rights. because we have a number of issues coming up that we're going to have to deal with. And so we've got some increase there for legal costs, the E-Core / legal costs for the North Fork. We have some water rights extension and professional services increased by about $93,000. Plus we have some mandated plans coming up in 2015, 14, 15, and a little bit beyond. Our urban water management plan is up for review for 2015, so we got to get started on that as well. And there's an inundation study that's got to be done, and Larry can provide some information on that.
Yeah, we got tagged by DSOD on a re-rating of, Bill, was Lower Lock and Tenna Pond. They put us on notice that they consider it a high enough hazard to warrant an inundation study.
The Lower Lock and Tenna Pond.
Lower Lock and Tenna effluent storage pond.
Oh, our storage,
Yeah.
for a treatment plant, not the golf course.
Right, when it was.
Really?
When it was originally permitted, that wasn't the case. They've re-rated it.
They've also hit us with a couple of things that we've sent back for information, tell them that they might be done.
What's the agency?
Department of Safety of Dams.
Now, so is that related to because, you know, there's huge controversy about the whole, new floodplain maps. And the county has been working, trying to resolve some of those issues. I mean, they basically, it's like they hired an 8th grader with a orange felt pen to draw our floodplain maps. Have we somehow come under that, and maybe we should be coordinating that with the county to find out why would we, I can't imagine us being in a flood hazard there.
Well, they feel it imposes a potential threat to downstream occupants.
Oh, they think it's a threat, not that it would be overtaken like Valley Springs.
No, if it failed, and this is not uncommon. We have these sorts of things on all the North Fork dams, the large structures. Even if you had no flood zone down below you, you would still be subject to this.
Yeah, okay.
And finally, under non-departmental, we've shifted some costs from some of the other departments, specifically the general management, into non-departmental because they're not directly related to a singular department, but they benefit everybody. Some of the things we moved is building expenses for this particular building, any other expense, claims that we have against the district, our JPIA insurance for property and liability, because that benefits the entire district. We see that retiree health costs have increased by about, we're projecting $75,000. Part of this is, and I'm going to step back a second for retiree health. If you remember, there's two components of our retiree health costs. One is pre-funding for current employees, one is payment for existing retirees. Most of our cost increases is on the existing retiree section because medical costs are increasing, plus we have some new retirees that come into play as well. Yes?
How many retirees are receiving that? Do you know?
No, I don't at this particular. I haven't looked at the numbers for quite some time. But I do know that, because I just received it myself, PERS Medical has contracted out with a company to go through and make sure that all dependents are legal, and that if you're going to be paying for dependent care and including into it, you have to provide legal documentation that proves that your dependent is eligible for insurance. I have to submit my daughter's birth certificate to prove that she's my daughter and she's of age.
Is that going to the retirees also?
It's going to everybody under PERS Medical. So this is their audit, so to speak. Property and liability insurance costs are projected to increase about $34,000, and we increased the debt service by $398,000, and this is for the capital R&R loan that we took out with Umpqua Bank for the water and sewer. Even though the budget is in the operating budget, we are going to be moving $398,000 from the capital R&R fund, the revenues from that, to cover this debt service. And that was part of this process because the capital R&R revenues can be used only for projects or debt service on loans that were taken out to complete R&R projects.
Okay.
Excuse me, can I ask again what that capital R&R loan was?
It was a 7-year loan with Umpqua Bank. We did an RFP to go out and find the best rates. $2.3 million for the sewer capital R&R projects and $4 million for water capital R&R projects.
Okay, and this is what you did so that you could have the money to pay for.
To help pre-fund, because otherwise it's
the
a
rates have not
pay-as-you-go.
come in.
Yeah, otherwise it would be pay-as-you-go. We have some significant projects, and I'm going to show you the capital of the CIP projects in just a moment. And some of them are rather expensive, including Reach 3A.
Can I go back to the Board of Directors?
Yes.
Why is there such a significant increase?
It's the election.
Election.
Oh, it's just the election costs,
Just the election
okay.
costs. And actually, I've got, here is just a summary of the expenditures. We're increasing the budget by about $250,000 from last year, but remember, $380,000 of that is coming in from the capital R&R loan debt service, so we've had reductions as well. Some of the reductions is in capital outlay. Number of the projects we did in the past have been funded or are coming to completion, the Jenny Lynn ozone generator and the clear well down there, so those were significant projects. And any future, there's some future capital outlay or capital projects that are now included in the R&R budget. This is basically the capital outlay, less than $50,000 as far as costs are concerned. CIP is $50,000 or more, and sometimes they take a year or more to complete. Here is the change by department, and one of the things you'll notice is some reductions in general management, but there's also a offset increase in non-departmental because of the shifting of the budgetary for those significant costs for JPIA insurance and some of the other things that have been shifted over. We have an increase in administrative services because we've taken on a little bit more responsibility as far as transferring some staff members that were in other departments over. That's part of the increase there. We also have a decrease in utility services, and a significant portion of that was moving 2 employees out. The meter readers are now in customer service, so they shifted over, and that's part of that administrative service budget increase, as well as reducing the capital outlay budget by about $400,000. Now, everybody likes the bottom line. When I look at revenues and expenses, we're balanced about $4,000 surplus. It's basically very similar to what we did last year as far as what we have. Now, I caution the board in that, as I mentioned earlier on, there's some unknowns out there. The curtailments, the amount of cutbacks, how